Bangkok International Symposium on HIV Medicine 2020. My name is Raksa. I'm delighted to be back once again this year. Now we are streaming live from BITEC Bang Na, and earlier on this morning we did have the official opening ceremony, and we went straight into the plenary sessions by our expert guests, doctors flying in from different places around the world to share the latest advances in HIV medicine. And right here we are going to go straight into the interview sessions. So basically what happens is each professor has their time inside the plenary hall delivering the latest updates, and then we bring them out here to have a quick interview session. And conducting the interviews regarding the future direction for HIV therapies is Dr. Annette Son, the Director of Treat Asia here in Thailand. Hello, it's so good to have you here with us.
Great to be back.
And I'm so excited to find out the latest. We are going to go straight into it and invite our first guest. Welcome Dr. Anthony Kelleher, the Program Head of Immunovirology and Pathogenesis Program at the Kirby Institute for Infection and Immunity in Society, Australia. Sawadee ka. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I was listening in to your presentation earlier on. We learned so much, and I'm going to leave it to Dr. Annette to pose the questions to you.
So thank you very much, Pankachari. So Professor Kelleher, some really exciting discussions about the advancing science, in particular with regards to stopping HIV in its tracks, being able to either functionally cure HIV or prevent people from having to worry about the negative immunologic damage or inflammation that might occur with HIV virus and chronic infection. Can you share with us a little bit about your thoughts about what are the newest and most important and promising areas of science to help us get to a cure for HIV?
Well, I think curing HIV is going to be a very big is a big issue. The virus integrates into the genome and sits there for the life of the cell. So we need to achieve something that we've never achieved before with any sort of therapy. And in fact, our genome is full of retroviruses like HIV that we've evolved with. So to then remove a retrovirus from our genome is a very big challenge. So understanding some of the basic biology of how retroviruses are controlled over the eons of our evolution with these embedded retroviruses in our genome may help us design new therapies or get insights into how we might convert HIV into one of those retroviruses that we now live with. And so you know, one approach is an approach that we and others are taking of trying to enforce the virus to be silent, to be unable to reproduce itself. Another approach that has had more testing in humans but has not shown very encouraging results yet is trying to wake that virus up and then kill the cells that are carrying the virus, and therefore get rid of the reservoir, which would be a complete cure. And there's interesting technology there, apart from the shock and kill approach that's been taken so far with advances with CRISPR-Cas gene technology. That is still in its infancy and has its own issues and limitations. But certainly, that would actually delete the virus altogether from the genome. So there are a range of approaches being taken to this very big problem. Which one will actually pan out? I think it's too early to say, and I think to be realistic so that the community understands, I think unless a miracle happens, I think, a cure is still some way off. It's certainly not something that is on the horizon.
So you mentioned the importance importance of how to communicate the science and the messages to the community. So how might you explain sort of the science that you just presented, perhaps in a more lay terminology for people who don't understand the immunology quite so well? How would you explain sort of the putting the virus to sleep, for example, or different approaches that you're taking now?
So the virus has different states. It can either be awake and reproducing itself, or it can be asleep and silent. And there are various influences. So the virus sits inside a cell, it sits inside cells of the immune system, and various infections that we're exposed to wake up bits of our immune system and therefore have the potential to wake up the virus. So we need to be able to understand how the virus is regulated within that dynamic immune, in the immune system, which is very complex, and keep the virus asleep, or in fact delete the virus out of those cells or kill the cells that actually are infected. So, you know, it's either getting rid of the virus altogether or it's putting it to sleep so that it can't wake up.
Okay. And then if we're talking about what it will take to advance the science to the point where we can achieve what you call that miracle of being able to either keep the virus asleep so much that it's not going to affect a person's life or their health, or waking it up so that we can kill it, what are some of the barriers or steps that we need to take as a community, as a advocacy groups, as researchers to get to that point?
So we need to understand the basic science. We then need to design therapies that are possible that might work. They need to be tested in various models. And once we have something that looks promising in those animal models or in tissue culture in the laboratory and looks to be safe, and that's critical, particularly as people now on antiretroviral therapy live in excess of 40 years, we need to be able to then at that point take that into volunteer studies. But we need to be able to communicate the risks and benefits clearly with those volunteers.
It's a very good point. And perhaps sort of towards the end now of our interview, talking about the Kirby Institute. I mean, you are the director of the Kirby Institute. You just gave the Professor Cooper Memorial Lecture. And the Kirby Institute was a founding member of HIV-NAT, helped to build up the research capacity here in Thailand, where now we're doing advanced clinical trials on treatments, on cure. What do you see as the future of Kirby's relationship to our programs here in Thailand and around the region?
So the Kirby has always been dedicated to working in the region, and we will absolutely continue that. And HIV is one of our focuses, but we are interested in other bloodborne diseases. We have programs in sexually transmitted infections, and you know, I presented a lot of basic science today, but we do clinical science and we do implementation science. So the Kirby tries to address the whole package of treatment delivery from discovery through to making sure populations have access to those discoveries in an equitable fashion. And we're very keen to continue working in the region. I have in fact spent the last 3 days in Myanmar, where we ran the first Yangon Symposium. So, and where we're keen on building capacity in Myanmar. But that's in HIV, but also in other infectious diseases. So we are very excited to be working in the region. We have projects in Indonesia, in PNG. We continue to work with the Thais through HIV-NAT, and we're expanding in Myanmar and other places. So we're here for the long haul.
That's very exciting, and certainly that commitment to supporting research capacity development and clinical care training and delivery within the region has been such a great resource for not just my organization, not just HIV-NAT, but others across the region. Could you, I guess, highlight a few of the things that you're doing in Myanmar? You said you were just at a Yangon Symposium. How is that? Is that related at all to what we're doing here, or modeled on the work that's been done in HIV-NAT?
It's actually taking the HIV-NAT model and trying to apply it. So we have, the Kirby has established a collaboration with a university called UM2 in Yangon. It's about that collaboration is about 3 years old, and we already have 9 active projects. We've already completed a number of projects, and it's really, we work with the senior clinicians in the hospitals there, but all the projects we're running are led by junior clinicians who are keen to become clinician researchers. And you know, they are very smart people, they are very well trained, but they don't have the resources. And so we're just facilitating that, and they're in fact doing most of the work. And it's a pleasure to work there at the moment, and you know, it allows us to expand our profile in the region, hopefully without diluting it elsewhere. So, you know, I think it's very, very exciting.
Well, certainly hearing that the HIV-NAT model and lessons learned from your collaborations here in Thailand are now being applied to expand work and build capacity elsewhere. That's also really exciting for HIV-NAT itself. And maybe the last thing I'd ask you about is CHART. The Cooper HIV/AIDS Research Training Program, if I've got that correct. And it's been an opportunity that's expanded access to training, not just sort of beyond Thailand or even beyond Myanmar. Could you share about that?
So the CHART program is actually sponsored by VIV, and we bring early and middle career researchers from across the spectrum of research, clinical through to implementation and advocacy, down to the Kirby for a couple of weeks, a couple of times a year, to be exposed to the experts at the Kirby. And they have a project that's ongoing, and we help them do the analysis and design future projects. So it's absolutely aimed at capacity building. We're halfway through the first intake of those individuals. So it runs over a 2-year period. They've been down once last year. They're about to come back to the Kirby. And we're actually advertising at the moment for the new intake of the CHART scholars. So if there are people out there watching, the program is called CHART. There is information available on the Kirby website, and I'd encourage you to apply. We have identified through this some very, very dynamic people from across the region, including the Philippines, and that's allowing us to increase our collaboration in the Philippines. It's a terrific program.
And all in honor of Professor David Cooper.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Kelleher. What a wealth of information you have just shared with us there. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Once again, sharing with us the latest advances, updates on finding a cure. It was great to hear that the HIV-NAT model being expanded to other countries in the region as well. And we're still hoping for that miracle to happen. All right, let's move on now to discuss access, IP, and human rights. Also, another very interesting topic. Let's bring on here now from the Therapeutics Research Education AIDS Training in Asia, or TREAT, in Thailand. A colleague of yours is a program manager for community and policy, Mr. Giten Khwairakpam. Hello, Mr. Giten. Sawadee ka. Thank you very much for your very informative presentation just inside, an overview, etc. Appreciated that very much indeed. And you can actually go back and watch his presentation online, and that is worldwideweb.hivnat.org. But for now, let's go straight into this interview. We do want to find out more.
Thank you.
Sure. So I guess I should say that we have a little bit of a conflict of interest because technically I'm Giten's boss, but certainly sort of a proud parent kind of person now after Giten has given the Professor Yup Langa and Jacqueline Van Tongeren Memorial Lecture. As many of you may know, we lost Professor Yup and Ms. Jacqueline during the MH17 disaster and tragedy. And so we're very honored to be able to have this memorial lecture. And in fact, Giten, you are the first person to give this lecture who was not a close personal friend of Yup and Jacqueline. And I think that sort of speaks to the legacy that they have left behind that reaches way beyond their circle of colleagues or friends or even this symposium to the kind of work that you're doing. So maybe could you share a little bit about how access to medicines has become such a passion of yours?
I have had very, you know, the place where I come from has a lot of issues around HIV. And when we were young kids, we used to see, you know, when I was in my university, we used to have a lot of people who we knew were trying to organize themselves to form into HIV-related groups. And later on, we realized, and then, you know, I started working with them, started doing with, you know, sort of the kind of work that, you know, we call now as treatment advocacy. And I realized that later on, you know, what we were doing was part of advocacy, but I was like, I was just interested. I was just plainly interested in knowing more about the infection, knowing more about what needs to happen, and knowing it was a great thing at that time to know that there are newer medications that were coming out, and I just went along with the flow.
So your talk spent a lot of time sharing with us about the history of the HIV epidemic here within the region and efforts to really fight to get access to treatment, antiretroviral medicines, but not only access to the medicines, but price reductions because they were just so incredibly expensive at the beginning of our HIV epidemics here in the region.
Right.
And now we have an amazing combination drug, which as you shared with the participants, the global fund procurement price is $66 per person per year for a combination of tenofovir, lamivudine, and dolutegravir, going from the price you shared of $10,000 per person per year for just AZT as a single drug. We have truly come a long way.
Right.
Can you talk more about how we got to that point and what you sort of see as the future of creating access to these medicines here in the region?
Yeah. There is this, as I shared during my talk, you know, there has been a history, and medicines used to cost, a single monotherapy of AZT used to cost, in 2001, it was around $10,000 per person per year, so that was extremely expensive medication. Things have evolved. Now, India had contributed a lot in this process, the evolution of the pharmaceutical industry there because of the changes in the patent law, the reformation that happened in 1972 that had allowed the Indian generics to come more and then, you know, enter into an atmosphere where their production and the flourishing time of the Indian pharmaceutical industry actually began at that time. So there has been that long history of this. Now, there are also a lot of interests that has gone into ensuring that the quality of these drugs are actually assessed. So that has also been undertaken very actively by the Indian generic pharmaceutical industry. But overall, for all of this, the medications are there, the pricings are there, but for these to actually reach the people who needs these medications, our FDAs, you know, our national programs would have to catch up, would have to do better in terms of ensuring that we get this approved, these drugs which are extremely effective approved, and then we make sure that these are enlisted in our national programs and are being procured, paid by our national programs to ensure that these treatments are actually reaching the people. So that step is somewhere where we are lacking a little bit behind in the region and needs to pick up.
So what do you think needs to happen in order for us to get those medicines at such low prices to our patients?
I think one of the things is, number one, as I said, is a regulatory uptake. Our national drug regulators have to approve this fast. There are mechanisms like the WHO pre-qualification process and the collaborative process of registration, and many countries in our region have not used the collaborative process of registration, which allows drugs to get faster to their countries and also in their national programs. Only Philippines and Thailand in one instance have used this. The rest of the countries have not used this collaborative process of registration. So those are some of the avenues that are available with our national program, so that this drugs actually gets faster to the people who needs this.
And so you mentioned that, well, we've been talking about the $66, $70 per person per year medicine, and yet the pediatric formulation is $740 per person per year for a 20-kilogram child. I mean, the difference between 70 and 740 is tremendous, and you would think that you'd spend less because there are fewer, like less drug to give to a small child. Why is it that pediatric treatment is just so expensive?
I mean, these are the cost of the $700 is actually the granules or the pellets that, as I had mentioned. If we look at the oral solution, which was earlier, that's slightly lower at around $238 per person per year. But then again, that's also far more expensive if you compare to $66 per person per year, which is for the pediatric, which is for the adults. So, I mean, number one, there is, as I say, there is a very limited amount of manufacturers. There are not many, players who are actually entertaining the pellets. There are limitations that has already been documented around the use of this, and the limitation in the sense that the promotion or the uptake of this, even by healthcare providers or by hospitals or caregivers, are very less compared to the other drugs that are available. So there are limitations. The number of manufacturers definitely have to come up, have to increase. Where there are supplies, where there are procurement, we have always seen that the drug prices would drop. So that eventually, I think, the number of manufacturers, the number of procurers, as and when those increases, eventually this price also would have to go down. Although the volume is going to be lesser, of course.
And so what do you think are really the top priorities for civil society advocates and activists as we seek to continue to bring down prices and truly deliver treatment to everyone?
I think one of the important things is, as I mentioned, around defending the patent laws or making the patent law better. The Indian law, in the Indian patent, the law has already been kind of replicated in Philippines in 2008 and also by Argentina in 2012. So there are countries which are looking at the Indian patent law to actually make their laws even better to ensure that access to treatment is improved. So that's one of the things that civil society could do. The other one is around challenging, the patents, number two, which they all, as I mentioned, many of them have been doing. The other thing is around making sure that people understand. Now, if we look at the whole Asia Pacific, we're only having 53% people on treatment. We need everybody who is infected with HIV to be on treatment if they're willing. So everybody is to be at least offered that treatment. So that the civil society and community groups actually play that very vital and important role to make sure that people are coming out, people are getting tested, beyond beyond the challenge in legal issues and all of those, but making sure that they're touching the people, they're reaching out to the people, getting them tested, and being on treatment, and make sure that people are retained on treatment after they have started on treatment.
So very much not just about the price of the drug, but making sure that we test people so that they know they have HIV, we link them to care, and we ensure that they can have access to the treatment that they need.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mr. Giten. It's wonderful indeed to hear that these combination drugs, they're made more accessible and the price is a lot more friendlier than, say, a couple of years ago. But definitely still more has to be done for even more efficiency and greater accessibility for all. Once again, thank you very much, Giten Khwairakpam, Program Manager for Community and Policy at Treat Asia, Thailand. And to wrap up this first live streaming interview sessions, we are going to focus now, and we talk about this every year because it's extremely important that we do get an update on antiretroviral therapy. So we'll get an update on that right now. We'll bring on Professor Daniel Kuritzkes, Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School, Chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Sawadee ka. A warm welcome. Please do take a seat. And we've got 10 precious minutes. We want to squeeze as much from you as we can in those precious 10 minutes.
So thank you very much, Professor Kuritzkes, for joining us today and sharing about really the cutting edge of HIV treatment. I mean, looking at your presentation, it's almost like science fiction. You talked about things that are so far beyond what I think many of us here at the symposium are really familiar with. You talked about injectable medicines. You talked about implants. I mean, what do you think that an average person living with HIV can expect in terms of how their treatment will change in the next 5 years?
I think what's going to be really exciting is that people are going to have many different choices. Just like we see choices in contraception, we see choices in the management of osteoporosis and many other kinds of diseases. People who like taking a pill a day and who are very comfortable doing that are going to be able to keep doing that and treating themselves the way they've been doing so all along. But for people where that's a real challenge, whether it's because having the pills at home raise issues around disclosure, whether it's because taking a pill every day is a daily reminder of the stigma of HIV infection, or whether because people's lives are just so chaotic that it's hard to remember to take even one pill every day, being able to space that out and maybe get an injection every month or every 2 months, or down the road getting an implant once or twice a year is going to really create much more freedom for individuals.
So you mentioned the implant, which I think is probably the most exciting technology that many of us have heard about. This concept that we can put in an implant and that people would not even have to think about taking their antiretroviral medicines. Could you share a little bit with our audience about what that might look like in terms of the practical aspects of having an implant with antiretrovirals?
Well, the concept is exactly the same as what's currently used for long-acting contraception. It's a tiny, thin rod about that big that would typically go in the upper arm, and it's put in by an automatic inserter, so a nurse or a medical technician can do it. It doesn't have to be done by a physician. And that implant would stay in place for 6 to 12 months. It could probably be felt under the skin, so it may not be completely obscure. And at the end of that period, it has to be removed and replaced by another implant. And that can be done by, again, a qualified medical worker. It doesn't have to be a physician. I think it will be attractive for many people. It may not be something that everybody would be willing to use. And again, right now, it's only a single drug, and we'd probably need at least 2 drugs. And whether these can be combined with contraceptives for women, so they could get a single implant that provided both protection from HIV and protection against pregnancy, or whether with a second implant provided a stable antiretroviral therapy over the course of 6 or 12 months. We'll learn as these agents continue to be developed.
And so at this symposium and then later on in the next few days, we'll hear a lot about U equals U, or undetectable equals untransmissible. What does having an implant that might constantly control your HIV viral load, what does that mean for U equals U?
I think it gives people even more confidence that they don't have to remember every day to take a pill in order to be able to be undetectable and be suppressed. That they know as long as this implant is in place, as long as it's within the lifetime of the implant, and that's going to be the important thing, is you will need to have it replaced and redosed. It's not a forever thing. That you will still be undetectable and therefore untransmissible.
It's very exciting, and perhaps looking at maybe the not so exciting side of these new drugs is sometimes when we give new treatments, we discover adverse events or side effects that we did not expect. With dolutegravir, that was the unexpected weight gain associated with long-term dolutegravir treatment, and that has caused a lot of discussion within the community. And here, especially as we're now beginning to consider how we might roll out dolutegravir in the Asia-Pacific region. So could you share about these newer drugs and efforts to make sure we have what's called post-marketing surveillance, or after the drug is approved, how might we make sure that we're monitoring for these adverse events or preventing negative outcomes among our patients?
I think the most important thing is really collecting the data and recognizing that just because something is new doesn't necessarily mean it's absolutely better than what we have already, and that simply because drugs are new means that we will have less information, and we have to keep collecting data about toxicities as they accumulate down the road. It's very important to have cohort studies that follow people on new therapies for longer periods of time than the typical 1 or 2 years of a randomized trial, so that we have a greater perspective on potential side effects of these drugs.
And so among all of these sort of newer drugs that we heard about just this morning, Are there any that are very close to being able to be used outside of a research study, or when do you think people here in the Asia-Pacific region might be able to have access to these novel treatments?
Right. Well, cabotegravir, rilpivirine as long-acting injectables have completed their phase 3 trials. They've been reviewed by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And as I mentioned in my talk, we were anticipating approval at the end of December. That got postponed a bit because of some concerns around the manufacturing process. And I would assume that as soon as those concerns are addressed, which would hopefully be within the next couple of months, that combination will be approved and then should become available. How that will be priced and how access will be made available to populations in lower and middle income countries, I think is going to be an important challenge for groups like yours to take hold of and ensure that there is access globally.
And then you also mentioned that some of these were newer categories of medicines. Do you see, even beyond what you have presented to us, even more opportunities to develop new therapies?
I think if we've learned anything in AIDS research over the last 30 or 40 years, it's to be surprised. Every time we think we've exhausted the possibilities for drug targets and for new drug classes, another drug comes along, a new class like the capsid inhibitor. I think there are different kinds of integrase inhibitors that target the interaction of integrase with cellular proteins that may be amenable to drug development, and there are still drugs that may target either other structural proteins, different parts of the virus particle, or some of the regulatory proteins that have yet to be investigated.
And do we have time for another question? Maybe this involves a little bit of a preview of your talk later on during the symposium, but you focused on medicines during this talk, but there are other interventions, immune modulators, vaccines that could potentially be used with these medicines to treat people living with HIV. Could you just give us a sneak peek into how we might be looking at sort of adjuvant or alternative, sort of like additional treatments, adjunctive therapies to medicines?
Well, I think the most exciting are actually drugs that Denise Chu will be talking about, the broadly neutralizing antibodies. Therapeutic vaccines begin to blend in a little bit into the sort of sustained remission cure research agenda. There's been an interest in that approach for more than 20 years, and it's been very frustrating at how little progress we've been able to make because we just don't understand how to make a successful vaccine yet, let alone a therapeutic vaccine.
Thank you very much, Professor Kuritzkes.
Very welcome. My present.
Thank you so much, Khawpun Ka, Professor Daniel Kuritzkes, the Chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Brigham Women's Hospital in the United States of America. So fascinating and exciting, the future of treatment. We're going to be having more options, not the traditional pill, but injections, and the professor just talked about the implants there. So very exciting update being shared, and I must thank you, Dr. Annette Son, Director of Treat Asia, also Vice President of AMFA USA, for coming in to interview the speakers just now. Thank you. Appreciate your help very, very much. Yes. And that is going to wrap up the first live streaming interview sessions as part of the 22nd Bangkok International Symposium on HIV medicine. We will meet once again at 12:40. We'll be focusing on PrEP, be it Thailand's road to universal coverage of PrEP, overview of PrEP implementation models, and lots more. So tune in then, beginning 12:40. I'm Pathari Raksawong. Sawadee ka.